Tonight's topic is Jewish meditation. I received a frantic phone call a number of years ago from someone who was very agitated and very disturbed. They said to me, Rabbi Skobac, you have to get today's copy of the Canadian Jewish News, and on page so-and-so, there's a quarter-page ad for meditation. And they were so alarmed and so concerned, they were bothered. What's this doing in a Jewish newspaper? So before I tried to allay their concerns, I first grabbed my copy of the Canadian Jewish News, and I turned to that page, and I said to them, you have to read it a little bit more carefully. It says mediation. It was an advertisement for a mediation service. But what concerned me was that this person was so upset that somehow the Canadian Jewish News had an advertisement for a meditation program. And the truth of the matter is that there is widespread ambivalence and suspicion in the Jewish community about a practice that is seen as foreign to Judaism and rooted in other spiritual traditions. Over the past number of years, I think that concern has diminished, but when Jewish meditation first went through a bit of a renaissance in modern times, there was a tremendous backlash in the Jewish community, and still today, people express concerns. My wife is the meditator of the family. She teaches real classes in Jewish meditation, not just introductory sessions. And she was once asked here in Toronto to lead a series of classes for Russian immigrants in Jewish meditation. And the organization that wanted to sponsor these classes was a very religious Jewish organization, and some of the members expressed concern. They said, do we do that? Do Jews meditate? Is that okay with Judaism? Is it all right? Should we maybe consult with a rabbi? And so we set up in a meeting with one of probably the senior rabbi here in Toronto. And I remember being there with my wife and with the person from this organization, meeting with this rabbi, and the rabbi asked my wife to explain what she was going to teach. And my wife basically explained more or less what kind of thing she was going to do. And he stopped her and he said, don't tell me about what you're going to do it with me. I don't want to hear about it, I want you to do it. So my wife led this rabbi in the meditation, and he said, what's the big deal? He said, this is a mitzvah to teach this. He said, what you're doing is basically teaching people about kavanah. Kavanah is the Hebrew word for intention, for focused mindfulness. It's the focusing and directing of our mind in a particular direction. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, my wife's teacher, described meditation as thinking in a controlled manner. That's basically a non-sectarian activity. Everyone thinks, hopefully. And so meditation is simply the activity of thinking in a controlled manner. Certainly a Jewish thing to do. In Judaism, we most normally associate kavanah with prayer, with focusing our attention in prayer. In fact, the Talmud tells us that 2,000 years ago, people who were serious spiritually would meditate for an hour before they prayed, and to prepare themselves and to focus their minds, and they would meditate for an hour after they prayed in order to come back down, to transition back. And in truth, praying with focus, in terms of concentrating on what we are doing, concentrating on the fact that I'm praying now, focusing on the meaning of the words, and focusing on who we're directing our prayers to, is a quintessential meditative experience. The Bible tells us that Isaac, our forefather, went out lasuach basadeh, often translated as to meditate in the field. And Rashi explains that he went to pray. So we see that this is not a new age, recent spiritual development. Meditation goes back all the way to our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yet the Holy Kutzker Rebbe would always complain, why is it that people only talk about having kavanah when it comes to prayer? People talk about praying with kavanah, praying with intention, praying with focus, praying with concentration. And he would say, why are people only talking about having kavanah when it comes to prayer? He would say, what shouldn't a Jew be doing without kavanah? Meaning that ultimately everything should be done with kavanah, with intention, with mindfulness, with focus. In biblical times, there was a system of tithes, of taxes, that we practiced when we were living in the land of Israel. We knew that about 2% of our produce went to the priests. That was called truma. And then there was the next 10% of our produce went to the Levites. That was called ma'aser, the tithe, 1/10. And so every year, Jewish landowners would give about 2% of their produce to the priests. There weren't that many priests. And then another 10% went to the Levites to support the Levites. And then there was a cycle of 3 years, a 3-year cycle, where in the first and second year of that 3-year cycle, they would take an additional 10%. It was called Maaser Sheni, a second tithe. And people had to take that other 10% of their produce, and it was holy, and they would have to bring it to Jerusalem and eat it in Jerusalem. You didn't have to give it away to anyone, but you had to eat it in Jerusalem. You couldn't eat it in Beersheba or in Tel Aviv. Or if you couldn't schlep it all to Jerusalem, you would redeem it for money and then spend the money in Jerusalem. But the first 10% went to the Levites, and the next 10% during years 1 and 2 you had to consume in Jerusalem. But during year 3, that second tithe went to the poor. It was called Maaser Ani. It was a tithe to the poor people. And so during years 1 and 2, you ate the produce of the second tithe in Jerusalem. Year 3, it would go to the poor. The Bible tells us that at the end of this 3-year cycle, the landowner would recite a confession that he fulfilled all of his tithing responsibilities properly. So they had to actually make a formal declaration that I took everything out of the house, I didn't hoard things for myself, and I fulfilled all of my tithes properly. And the confession went as follows. He would say, I have given to the Levite, to the proselyte, which is to the convert, to the orphan, and to the widow. I have not transgressed any of your commandments, and I have not forgotten them. So the Sfas Emes, who was the second Ger Rebbe, pointed out what seems to be a redundancy here. What do you mean, I have not transgressed any of your commandments, and I have not forgotten them? Obviously, if you haven't transgressed God's commandments, you haven't forgotten them. So the Ger Rebbe pointed out that tragically and unfortunately, it's possible to forget about the commandments, to be absent from the commandment at the very moment you're doing it. You could be doing something and totally not there. You could be at a Passover Seder eating matzah, and while you're chewing that matzah, thinking about where you'll be eating lunch the next day. That's what's on your mind. You're not thinking about the matzah, what the matzah represents, what it means, what kind of association you should have with it, why did God command us to eat matzah, what is the experience of matzah like, how does it taste, how does it feel. You could be somewhere totally elsewhere. You could be visiting someone in the hospital, the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. And yet you're distracted and not fully present. You're not fully there. This syndrome is very commonplace nowadays with the WMD, the weapons of mass distraction that pervade our society. I'm sure that most of you have had the experience of trying to have a conversation with someone who is dividing their attention between you and their BlackBerry. We would hope at least that people would drive their cars with focus and attention. Yet how many accidents take place regularly because someone is behind a 2,000-pound vehicle going at 60 kilometers per hour and texting at the same time? So in our Bible, in the book of Exodus, chapter 24, God says to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and be there." Come up to me on the mountain and be there. And again, the Kutzker Rebbe points out, this is not a redundancy. You might think, what do you mean, come up to the mountain and be there? Once you're on top of the mountain, you're there. And the Kutzker Rebbe pointed out that no. Unfortunately, it's possible to go up on top of the mountain and be somewhere else. They tell a story about a rabbi who walked over to a congregant one morning after the prayers. This is a congregant who'd been coming to this minyan every day for months and months and months. And one day the rabbi walks up to this person and says to him, he gives him a big shalom aleichem, the kind of thing you say to someone that you haven't seen in a long time. And the congregant says to the rabbi, "Shalom aleichem, Rabbi, I've been here with you every day for months now." And the rabbi says to this congregant, "No, you weren't here today. You were at the trade fair in Chicago. Your lips were here. You took up a seat in the synagogue, but you were not really here." The holy Baal Shem Tov used to say, "You are where your mind is." You are where your mind is. And so at its most basic level, Jewish meditation is learning the art of mindfulness, the art of being present, the art of paying attention, the art of being focused and aware. That's what Jewish meditation is. Of course, this is not easy to accomplish. The funny thing about our minds is that they have a mind of their own. The Buddhists call it monkey mind. If you watch a monkey jumping around from branch to branch, doesn't stay still, that's the way our minds behave. Our minds are incredibly active and they're very hard to control. And if you just let them go, they will jump from here to there and go from this thought to that thought, and it's very, very difficult to control our minds. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in his wonderful introduction to Jewish meditation called Jewish Meditation, suggests the following experiment. He says, try this for the next 1 minute. We're going to do an experiment. Don't think about anything for the next 60 seconds. Right now, stop thinking. That can feel like a very long minute. Because as Rabbi Kaplan points out, unless you're a very, very experienced meditator, it's very hard to do that. Probably within that minute, you're saying to yourself, I'm trying not to think. Uh-oh, I'm thinking. Or maybe you're thinking about what you just ate for dinner, or something else. It's a very, very hard thing to do. You know, we have a custom in Judaism to try to pray in front of a wall. There's a custom that when you go to pray, you should be facing a wall. Now, why might we have such a custom? So the commentaries point out that the reason we try to stand facing a wall is as an aid to our concentration. That we shouldn't have thoughts and things that distract us. We should be able to pray with a clear mind. And it helps us to focus by having nothing really between us and the wall. a very simple aid in concentration. Rabbi David Cohen from New York asks a very, very interesting question. He says, what is the source of this custom? Where did this custom come from of praying in front of a wall? Who was the first person to ever do it? So if you study the book of Isaiah, the prophet Yeshayahu, that's the source of this custom. There was a king in the book of Isaiah. His name was King Chizkiyahu. He's called Hezekiah in English. And he became very, very sick. And the prophet Isaiah told him, you, sir, are going to die. Your life is over. It's finished. He didn't feel he was ready to die. He felt he had a lot more life to live. And so the Bible tells us that he went and faced a wall and prayed. And he prayed very hard, and God answered his prayer, and his life did not end. He was given 15 more years of life. Rabbi Cohen asks a very simple question. You would imagine that the last person on the planet who would need some artificial device to help him focus during prayers is going to be King Chizkiyahu praying for his very life. Did you think that in the middle of this prayer he was going to start wondering, oh, did I turn off the stove? Did I lock my car? How about this business meeting I have to go to tonight? Those thoughts are going to intrude upon his prayers at that point? He's literally begging for his life. Why would it be difficult for him to focus his intention, to concentrate? And so Rav David Cohen says, you see from this how difficult it is to pay attention, how difficult it is to concentrate, how hard it is to focus. That even King Chizkiyahu, who was begging for his life, had to go stand in front of a wall so he would have no distractions and he would be able to fully concentrate. Julius Sis, my boss and partner, showed me once an amazing thing. He's an artist, so maybe he was more sensitive to this. And I remember we tried this once in our office up in Thornhill. We had a package that was being picked up for delivery that was going to be sent to the United States, and it was being picked up by a fellow who worked for Federal Express. And we asked him, did you ever happen to notice in the logo of your company an embedded image, a hidden image, a symbol that is hidden and embedded in your logo? And this fellow didn't know what we were talking about, what's embedded, shmedded. And so we said, again, like a symbol, something that's in the logo, that's hidden, that's sort of there behind the scenes. He had no clue what we're talking about. So Julius pointed out, do you ever notice that in the FedEx logo is an arrow? There's an arrow, it's a white arrow right between the E and the X. Look, right between the letter E and the letter X is a white arrow in the negative space. How many people are not able to see that white arrow? Just raise your hand. If you cannot see it, if you cannot see it. Okay, I've got a good eye doctor I'm going to recommend. Yes, please do. But everyone else I trust is able to see this white arrow right over here between the E and the X. How many people were aware of this arrow before this evening? So for most of you, this is a revelation. Well, I'm going to share with you why I think this is important. What's important about this experiment is that I'm willing to bet, not a lot of money, but I'm willing to bet that tomorrow, if a FedEx truck passes you by, you might notice the arrow tomorrow when you've never noticed it before. I'll tell you that after this was pointed out to me, something very strange happened. The first things that my eye focuses on, I see an arrow. I don't see F-E-D-E-X. I don't even see letters. When I look at this, the first thing that my eyes focus on is an arrow. And then, in the background of the arrow, I see letters. But I suspect that those of you who never noticed this arrow before are going to notice it the next time you see a FedEx truck. What is the lesson here? The lesson is that your awareness will impact your experience. That the way you experience life is affected by the awareness that you carry with you, by your consciousness. What is the awareness that Judaism seeks to foster? The awareness that Judaism seeks to develop within us is something that's called Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid. I set God before me at all times. I have the presence of God in front of me at all times. And a person who fosters this kind of consciousness is experiencing what the Bible describes as devekus, or devekut. Devek in modern Hebrew is the word for glue. Dveikut means to cleave, to bond, to become very tight with. In the Bible it says in the beginning of Genesis that every person will leave the house of their parents and they will cleave, v'davak ba'ishto, they will cleave to their spouse. That's about as close as you can describe in the Hebrew language. And so the Bible tells us that's what we're supposed to do with God. Each one of us should become that close, that tight, that intimate with God, the way we're intimate with our spouse. We'll get back to this a little bit later. How do you accomplish that? But the simple baseline activity is to have a consciousness of God's presence at all times. To go through the entire day and always realize that we are in the presence of God and God is with us. The goal of everything in Judaism, every single thing we do as Jews, every one of the 613 commandments, every practice, every holiday, every ounce of kosher food, every single thing we do as a Jew has one goal, and that is to lead us to God. A person wearing red glasses will see everything looking a little bit red. And so if we go through our day experiencing the world through our soul, if we see the world through our neshama, and we are aware of the Almighty at all times, then every person we see will look different. Imagine seeing every person you meet as someone who bears the image of God. The Bible tells us every human being was created in the image of God. We don't always appreciate that and see that in other people. Imagine walking down the street and being intensely aware of the fact that every blade of grass and every stone are creations of the Almighty, and that each and every one of their atoms is animated by Him. When the Chafetz Chaim heard thunder, this great holy rabbi would say, "Was will der Tate?" What does our Father want? He assumed that every single thing he experienced was God speaking to him. Imagine sitting at a meal and having the consciousness and awareness that the food that you are eating actually comes from God and not from no frills. Thinking about God as the source of your food is Jewish meditation. When you say a blessing before you eat, you're not just making a bracha. That is a meditation that you are saying. The blessing before you eat food and after you eat food is a meditation. When you contemplate the vastness of the night sky and you see every star pointing to God, you are meditating. If you make that connection. When you contemplate the incredible complexity of your eyes and each part of your body, it becomes a Jewish meditation when it brings you to a recognition and appreciation of God. The Kotzker Rebbe used to ask his students, "Where is God?" And after they gave all their answers, he says, "God is simply where you let Him in." That's where God is, wherever you let Him in. So we find that Judaism is basically a holistic system of mindfulness practice. That's what Judaism is. It's an integrated, holistic system of mindfulness practice. When we kiss a mezzuzah upon entering or leaving a room, that is supposed to be a meditative moment. We're not supposed to be like robots who are hypnotized to make this kind of gesture whenever we walk into a room, thoughtlessly. We're supposed to pause for a moment, touch that mezuzah, maybe even kiss it, but think about what is the message that is in those parchments to us when we enter a room? What is the message within those parchments when we leave the room? But we're supposed to pause for a moment. That moment is a moment of meditation. When we hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, we're supposed to be thinking about many things. When you hear the shofar and think about the fact that we're being judged, that contemplation is meditation. When we hear that shofar blast and we think about changing our lives, that contemplation is meditation. When we leave a bathroom and say the blessing Asher Yatzar, where we thank God for the fact that our bodies work, and I'm able to go to the bathroom, and we appreciate that. Such an everyday activity that's so easily taken for granted. I think it was Joni Mitchell who sang, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone?" And so when we say that blessing, Asher Yatzar, after we leave the bathroom, it's appropriate not to say it while we're walking and while we're thinking about 10 other things. We should actually pause and stand still and say this blessing and meditate about what we're saying. That is Jewish meditation. Every Shabbos, believe it or not, is a 25-hour Jewish meditation. You see, some Jewish meditations could take 3 seconds. And Shabbat is a 25-hour Jewish meditation where we tune ourselves into the fact that we are creatures and that this world we're living in was created by God. And because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, that's why I'm resting on this Sabbath day. So the Sabbath becomes an incredible meditation, an island in time, as Abraham Joshua Heschel described it, where we bask in the meditative glory of this thought that we are living in God's world, that God created, and so I don't create on the Sabbath. Kavanah, this kind of focused intention, kavanah, this kind of mindfulness, is ultimately what transforms dry religion into a dynamic, vibrant spiritual experience. A wise man once said, I often quote this, that the difference between religion and spirituality is like the difference between reading the menu and eating the meal. Very, very few people, no one, gets nourished or fed by reading the menu. And so what is it ultimately that kicks up a Jewish practice, a religious practice, from being simply a reading of the menu to a deep spiritual experience? How does it get promoted from religion to spirituality? It's done through meditation. It's done through kavanah. It's done through awareness. Religious Jews read the Shema twice every day. They open up a prayer book and they read from the book of Deuteronomy, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. How tragic it is that so few people think about what they're saying. Because we know it so well, we could say it automatically, like breathing. And then we continue. V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha. You should love the Lord your God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your might. And we say those words religiously if we're religious Jews. But if we leave the synagogue and don't think about that, well, here we saw the menu says, on the menu, love God. But unless we spend some time during the day thinking about loving God and thinking about why we should love God and thinking about how do we love God and spend some time doing it, we're just reading the menu. We've read on the menu you're supposed to love God. But what makes that a spiritual experience is to walk away from the Shema and now try to actualize, to implement what was on the menu. Rabbi Avigdor Miller suggested, not tongue-in-cheek, that it's not an unhealthy thing for a person to at least say once a day, God, I love you so much. We often don't say it to people in our lives. But as a starting point, just tell God you love him. And maybe spend a few minutes during the day thinking about why I should love God. What are all the things that God has done for me and for my family and for my people? All the things God has given me. I read a very touching story recently about a young man who passed away in his 20s, and they had an obituary in one of the Jewish newspapers, and they found after he died, he had notebooks. This young man kept notebooks, and every day he recorded every single blessing that he got that day from God. Everything that was given to him, every favor, everything that he could be appreciative of. This kind of spiritual awareness can impact every single thing we do during the day. How would I drive with kavanah? How would a person drive their vehicle, drive their car with spiritual awareness? Probably not by closing their eyes and crossing their legs in a lotus position. But how would a person drive with focused attention, with spiritual consciousness? You see, the Talmud asked the question I asked before. What the Bible tells us is that our goal is to cleave to God. In the same way that the Bible says we're to cleave to our spouse, we're to cleave to God. And the Talmud says, how do you do that? You can't hug God. So the Talmud says that the way you cleave to God is by becoming more godly yourself, by imitating God. You ever watch a teenager, go into a teenager's room, what do they have up on the wall? Their favorite rock star. And they want to dress just like this rock star, and their hair should be just like this rock star, and they want to hold their guitar just like the rock star. We like to be like those who we love. That's why they say spouses often begin to look like each other after a few years. But the way we try to ultimately get close to God is by becoming more like God. And so the meditative way of driving would be to get into the car and have an awareness which is, how would God drive down Bathurst Street? How would God drive? Would God ever let someone in front of him that was signaling to get in? I once observed that in Toronto, people would rather die than let you in front of them. So for a person to drive with a spiritual consciousness, they would have an awareness which would say, how could I be more godly when I'm driving? How can I be more generous? How can I be more giving? How can I look for opportunities to be giving and generous and kind when I'm behind this wheel? So when a person drives with that kind of an awareness, their driving is transformed into a spiritual experience. They're not just going from point A to point B anymore. The journey itself, that 3 kilometers on Bathurst Street, can become a profound spiritual experience. We often associate meditation with artificial, contrived, formal sessions where we sit up in a chair, we close our eyes. Virtually every religion has these kind of formal meditative exercises. Judaism is no exception. But the real goal of all meditation is to take these practices and to develop the skill to be able to pay attention and focus our attention all the time. In meditative traditions that spend time focusing on their breath, that's simply a tool, a technique to learn the art of paying attention, to learn how not to get distracted, to learn to keep your mind focused and clear and sharp. But that's not the end goal of meditative practice. The end goal is to take that ability to keep our minds awake and open and aware, and to bring that with us as we go through day-to-day, moment-to-moment life, the reality of our existence. Our relationship with our mother is not exhausted by sending a Mother's Day card once a year. And so meditation is not exhausted by sitting for a half hour or 20 minutes a day in a formal meditative practice. It's a baseline starting point practice. One of the oldest Jewish meditations goes back several thousand years. In the book of Psalms, which has 150 chapters, the last chapter of the book of Psalms, chapter 150, ends with the words, Kol haneshama tahalel Yah. Let every soul praise God. And the rabbis in the Midrash, they didn't write this 60 years ago or 30 years ago. This goes back thousands of years. The rabbis say the word soul, neshama, is very related to the word for breath, neshima. The word breath is neshima. Our soul is neshama. How did we get our soul? God breathed it into us. Before that, we were just a body, physical. And God took that physical body, and we're told in the Bible, breathed the breath of life into us. That was our spiritual soul, our neshama. So the rabbis say on this verse in the book of Psalms, Kol ha-neshama tahalel Yah, let every soul praise God. The rabbis say, no. Let every breath be a prayer, a blessing to God. And so one of the most ancient Jewish meditations is to use our breath as a way of connecting to the giver of that breath. And so it's something we don't do normally. We don't normally focus on our breath. It happens all by itself, very naturally. But it wouldn't be a bad thing to do, to spend a minute a day focusing on our breath and being aware of the fact that our breath is the source of our soul. It's what ultimately came from God and animates us spiritually. It's the most intimate connection we have with God, because every second of our life, God is breathing us. So if we want to feel the presence of God upon us, just be aware of our breath, and we'll feel God every second as we breathe. Rabbi David Aaron, from Toronto originally, suggested people try the following meditation on breathing. I'd like to ask you all to sit up straight for a moment and do something that you've all done many, many times. Pause for a moment and just take a breath. You all seem to have accomplished that. Let's do it one more time. Pause for a moment and take a breath. Not too difficult. Rabbi Aaron said, now let's pause for a moment and receive a breath. Receive a breath. Try it. Does it feel different to anyone? You see, when you take something, you disconnect it from its source. When you take something, you disconnect it from its source. When you receive something, what you receive contains the presence of the one who gave it. They say that Kabbalah, which means receiving, Kabbalah is the art of receptivity. It's the art of being able to receive, not of taking. Because when we take from this world, we're disconnecting the world from its source, from godliness. When we receive in this world, we're receiving gifts every moment from the giver. So when you give someone a gift, you give someone a present, what's important is not the little doll you gave your child. That doll represents you, because the child doesn't want to be bought off with gifts. The child really wants their parents. So the gift is a special thing because the gift contains the presence of the one who gave it. So it's a wonderful thing to meditate on once in a while. Think about the fact that we're receiving our breath. We're not taking a breath. It's different when we receive an apple. rather than taking the apple. When we take it, it's not really connected to the giver. When we receive it, we're receiving it as a gift. The rabbis speak about something that's called in other traditions mantra meditation. A mantra is a short phrase or a word that you repeat over and over and over again. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov used to repeat Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe. He would repeat it over and over and over. Sometimes people might even sing this in a nigun, in a chant. But chanting and repeating a mantra, a phrase over and over, is an incredibly powerful way of focusing our mind. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was the grandfather of the Musar movement, was once walking home and he saw there was a light burning in someone's home at 3:30 in the morning. He goes over and the shoemaker is still up, burning a candle and clapping on the shoes. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, it's so late, you're still working on the shoes. And he said, as long as the candle's burning, there's still time to fix. And they said in Salant that for the next month, they would hear Rabbi Yisrael Salanter saying this over and over and over to himself. This became a mantra. As long as the candle's burning, there's still time to fix. As long as my soul is still alive, there's still time to fix myself. But it's a powerfully motivating phrase. It's an inspirational phrase. And so Yisrael Salanter said, as a Musar practice, they would read phrases from the Talmud with lips aflame, he would call it, behispailus. And they would read something with great emotion. And they would read it over and over and over again because they didn't just want to touch their brain, they wanted to affect their emotions as well. So it was called Musar behispailus. They would take a chant and a phrase and just say it over and over and chant it and sing it in a very dramatic fashion. There are visualization practices as meditative techniques. My father, Alav Shalom, told me that once he visited a synagogue in Manhattan called Bnei Yeshurun. It's a synagogue that's very popular. You have to wait online to get in sometimes. And my cousin Lynn, who learned how to read the Torah, was reading the Torah. My father went to hear her read the Torah. And that time that they went was a holiday. It happened to be the holiday where they were saying Yizkor. My father told me that they said Yizkor at this synagogue, and he was so impressed. He said, how come no one ever did what they did in that synagogue before? My father had been saying Yizkor for many, many, many years, and he almost sounded angry. How come no one ever did what they did in that synagogue? He felt cheated. I said, what did they do? He said, the rabbi asked us all, before we said Yizkor, to close our eyes. I don't know how many synagogues in North America congregants are asked to close their eyes. But he said the rabbi asked us to close our eyes and to picture in our mind's eye the faces of the people we were saying Yizkor for. He said, I've been saying Yizkor for my parents for so long. He said, it was never as meaningful as when I did it this time. A simple visualization exercise. In Eastern traditions, they have something called mudras, where they have certain hand postures. We have that in Judaism. In Judaism, we're taught that when we pray, we should stand with our right hand over our left hand. As a matter of fact, one of the first meditations we do during the day is we put on our shoes. And the rabbis teach us how to put on our shoes. And you know what? It's a meditation. We put on our right shoe, and then the left shoe. And then we tie the left shoe, and then we tie the right shoe. It's not neuroses. It's trying to take a very mundane activity and to make it meaningful. And that's the incredible beauty of Jewish spirituality, that nothing can't be raised up into a meaningful spiritual experience. And so in Kabbalistic thought, the right always symbolizes love and mercy and kindness. And the left always symbolizes justice and law and strictness. And so when we stand like this, it's a prayer. We're saying we want God's love and God's mercy and God's kindness to overcome His justice and His law and the letter of the law. And so everything we do in Judaism, we're told, do the right before the left. So when you shower and you wash your right arm before your left arm, that's a meditation, if you're thinking about it. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov would recommend one of the most powerful meditative experiences that you can take on. He called it hitbodedut, literally, which means to be secluded, to be alone. And he would recommend that people go out into the forest. Today it's difficult to do that, so you lock yourself in a room or in your car. But he would recommend that people spend an hour a day, and if you can't do an hour, start off with 5 minutes, build to an hour. But spend time every day simply talking to God in your own words. It is one of the most powerful, intense spiritual experiences that you can have, and it's a very powerful meditative experience. It's called again hitbodedut, spending time just speaking to God in your own language, whatever is on your mind. I'm going to try to end, I know we're running short of time, with a visualization meditation. I have in front of you the letter Aleph of the Hebrew alphabet. The letter Aleph, if you came to the class on the mystical meaning of the Hebrew alphabet, symbolizes God, godliness, divinity. That's the letter Aleph. So I'd like you all to sit comfortably in your seats, close your eyes if you like, and just relax in the rushed meditation we're going to do. Take a deep breath. Imagine you're walking through a field of grass in a place which feels comfortable and familiar. You're walking towards the edge of the field where the woods begin. You walk into the woods, down a path alongside the edge of a stream, and you are struck by how incredibly beautiful everything looks. You come to a clearing, and you notice an enormous letter Aleph sitting solidly on the earth, reaching high into the heavens, as if it had sat that way for thousands of years. As you get closer to the Aleph, you notice that the lower yud of this Aleph is made of stone and has a small entrance, almost like a door, just large enough for you to comfortably enter, which you do. Inside is a cave. The stone walls are very cold. All around you on the walls of this cave are written repetitions of the letter Aleph, this first letter of the alphabet representing the name of God Elohim. As you look down, you notice that around your shoulders are straps which hold a knapsack on your back. It is a burden, and you did not even notice you had been carrying it. Suddenly, it feels quite heavy. You swing it off and carefully set it down on the stone floor in front of you. You open up the top of this knapsack, and inside is a pile of stones. One by one, you remove these stones, pausing with each one to feel its heft and its shape. Each one is a burden. Each one has a name. One is a burden from work. Another is an argument with a spouse or a relative. Another might be a health ailment you're working to overcome. You feel the coldness and the hardness of each rock, the hardness of each burden that you carry. Finally, these rocks are all surrounding you on the rock floor of the rock cave, and there are no more left in the bag. You now notice that a stream of light has broken through an opening in the ceiling of the cave, and that it is big enough to fit through. Just as you notice this, you find yourself rising up through that hole and soaring up into the sky as if you had wings. Below, you can see the field, the big letter Aleph, and the opening in the lower yud that you just left. The scene gets smaller and smaller as you rise. Soon the entire horizon of the round earth is in view, and you soar through the clouds and beyond until the planet itself is just a tiny speck in the distance. Finally, even that speck disappears, and you are left in the silent, distant heavens, certainly beyond your normal conception of space and almost beyond time itself. This is the realm of the upper Yud, the unpronounceable name of God. You now only faintly remember what it was like to be locked within time and space, within the mundane world. Here, there is no longer any past or future, no near or no far away. All things combine into one here, and this unity seems perfectly clear. If a place exists where it's possible to speak with those who are no longer living down on earth, where it's possible to see deep into the future or far into the past, this would have to be it. A place where past, present, and future all blend into one. This is the place which is not even pronounceable down on earth. Look around you and remember what it's like to be here. It will make it easier to return. Gradually, it feels time to return. As you feel yourself being pulled back to your spot on earth, you first are drawn back to the cave. The earth begins to look larger beneath you, and you can see the enormous stone which hides the cave. Soon you are back inside. You see at your feet all of those stones and burdens you left behind. You look at them closely, and you notice that they have all turned into beautiful gems. Only their outer coverings were made of stone all along, and those stone coverings have now fallen away and turned to dust. You pack up the gems into your backpack, take them with you back home to where you came, along the path by the stream, and back to the field, and finally, you are ready to open your eyes again, feeling relaxed, alert, refreshed, and blessed. Good night.